So welcome everybody to the M20 FA lecture series. And this morning, Brinda Somaya is going to talk to us. Hers is the final lecture of the series at the end of the semester. And I think from the poster and everything, you know what she's going to talk about. So welcome, Brinda, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. And Nilosha will now introduce you to the audience. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Brinda Somaya is an architect and an urban conservationist. Upon completion of her Bachelor's of Architecture from Mumbai University and her Master's of Arts from Smith College in Northampton, USA, she started her firm Somaya and Kalappa Consultants in 1978 in Mumbai, India. Over 4 decades, she has merged architecture, conservation, and social equity in projects ranging from institutional campuses and rehabilitation of earthquake-torn village to restoration of 18th century cathedral. Master planning and building design of multiple corporate and educational campuses has become one of her areas of expertise. Some of these award-winning campuses include Tata Consultancy Services, Banyan Park, Mumbai, Nalanda International School, and many more. The title of our talk is The Restoration of IIM-Ahmedabad, Continuity and Change. Welcome, Brinda ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would first like to thank Sept and particularly Anjali, who invited me for this talk. And it's a real pleasure. And since I know there are going to be a lot of students, I have an hour and a half, I hear, an hour to talk about the actual process and then half an hour of questions. So what I'm going to do is also begin with a little bit about my studio for a few minutes, because I think restoration work needs, not that you need to be educationally so qualified. Of course you have to be, but you should also have that passion and that interest in restoration work. And my studio particularly has always believed in a combination of both new work and restoring work. So it's a very special part. So I need to tell you a few things about the studio. I will begin to screen share. All right. So, the firm was founded in 1975. As you said, it's a very 4 decades, and we are based in the Heritage District of Mumbai. The studio has won different types of awards, both contemporary and restoration connected awards over the years for different types of work, right from restoring earthquake devastated village to a grade 1 building, Rajabai Tower. So I think what I've really enjoyed is the diversity of work and the fact that we live in such a great country like India, which has geographic, political, food, language, crafts, everything so very different. And it's like working in a continent. And that's been, of course, the greatest privilege that has been there. So these are just a couple of conservation projects which I wanted to share with you. One was the St. Thomas Cathedral right in Mumbai, which is the oldest church that was built. And of course, the Rajabai Tower and the University Library, where we finished phase 1 and we are currently doing the next phase of restoration. So lighting it up for the night and things like that. This is a foundation I started many years ago, the Hekar Foundation, where we bring out several books. We work on helping women who may want to have a postgraduate degree, and also have organized 2 conferences, one in 2000 and one in 2020, which we called Women in Design. We have launched a website just a few days ago where we want a lot of manifestos and archival material to be stored and shared with women and men all over the world. So our vocabulary has been, of course, the Indian ethos of water, walls, light, geometry, materials. And that's what's influenced our contemporary work. I'm working all over the country, from the Himalayas to deep down south, from east to west through the tribal areas of Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh. And that's what's been so exciting. And a sense of contribution, because we believe in India has so much of economic differences that as an architect, we have a responsibility to ensure some sort of equitable and just way of doing things to ensure a fair and equal future for all Indians in different parts. Okay, now we come to some collaborations. The reason I've shown this is we of course do most of our work on our own, but I do believe that we can collaborate with people worldwide and that we learn. And I've put this slide in particularly because I believe the Louis Kahn project of the IIM, I like to think that I could hear his voice and that there's some sort of collaboration that we're doing because of course, so many years have passed and so many changes also have to be there. We have to build for the future as well and make sure we preserve what's gone before. So I always think of it as a collaboration, which gives me great satisfaction. So conservation projects can be divided into the built heritage, which is of course preservation, restoration. I put it all down. I'm not going to read all this. I know that Anjali is recording it. But we also have community-based conservation, which could be villages or parts of slum restoration. How do we do that? Converting garbage dumps into gardens. These are also types of conservation. So we have the built and unbuilt heritage that we need to keep. So now coming to the IIM itself, it was a restoration, preservation, retrofitting, services, upgradation, and interiors. So I've broken the talk up into the process, understanding the campus, and then the dormitories, the library building, and just touching on the faculty block, which we have begun just a month ago. So I want to begin by reading something I wrote for the Docomomo magazine, just to give you a background of some thoughts. So the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad is now currently undergoing conservation project to preserve, restore, and upgrade the built fabric of the iconic and modern heritage structures designed by Louis Kahn. These include 18 dormitory buildings and the main complex, which he called the school, housing 4 faculty blocks, the classroom complex, and the Vikram Sarabhai library. So you can see this red rectangle. This is what we won in a competition that the IIM held. And these are the buildings that we won in that competition. So the project entails carrying out a detailed study of the cultural significance of the building, conducting surveys for preparation of as-built drawings, building condition mapping and assessment, preparation and execution of a detailed conservation plan and strategies for the restoration, retrofitting, and upgrading the built fabric, along with its spatial expression with due consideration to both its status as a significant work of 20th century monumental architecture and as a premier management institute of the country. So in 1961, at a time when professional management was a little known concept, Vikram Sarabhai and Kasturbai Lalbhai, with the support of the then Chief Minister of Gujarat and a group of enlightened individuals, founded and established the IIMA. So in a true spirit of public-private partnership, the IIMA was set up through a coalition of central and state governments, local industrialists, the Ford Foundation, and the Harvard Business School. The founders wanted the IIMA to generate knowledge that would be applied for development, and every move made towards its establishment strove for excellence. The reason I'm telling you all this is so that you understand what Kahn must have thought when he was brought into this project. But despite the founders having initially offered a commission for the IIMA to architect Balakrishna Doshi, Doshi recommended Kahn for the project, arranging the commission so that the architectural students and the National Institute of Design, which played a very important initial role, would have the opportunity to work with Kahn. So Kahn translated the educational philosophy into infrastructure by designing spaces that supported and promoted easy personal interaction and provided inspiration. And this is what's so important for all our campuses today. He achieved what every architect strives to achieve, the embodiment of a philosophy in a timeless structure. Monumentality, timelessness, and spirituality are elements that formed a part of the legacy of Khan. IIMA demonstrated the poetry of light and the creation of monumental architecture beyond the human scale. He conceived the IIMA, as I mentioned earlier, with 4 functions: the school, dormitories, the housing, and the staff housing. I now quote him. He said, "The school and the dormitories are a unit, like a monastery. Corridors are avoided by having deep porches of all the dormitory rooms where tea is served. Where tea is served and things are discussed. The school is around a court, which has in it an amphitheater. Everything here is planned around the idea of meeting." He goes on to say, "The material of brick-bearing walls and piers with concrete floors is retained throughout the larger spans, giving rise to arches and buttresses. The more modest spaces, simple slabs on walls." And I unquote. So the faculty blocks are located on the southwest corner. These are the faculty blocks of the court, connected by a long cloister, similar to that of the classroom complex, which is on the east side. The corridors also connected to the individual courts that separate the faculty wings. In the Khan Plaza, which is this, the court was never intended to be open on the northwest end, but was meant to be enclosed by constructing a dining hall. The hall was to be serviced by a circular kitchen designed to ensure the smell of cooking would not permeate the court. And when I did my research, I found drawings at the University of Pennsylvania of so many different alternatives that Khan had planned for that corner, different shapes and sizes for his kitchen and dining hall, because he believed that people would walk across this court and come to this dining hall. And then he had actually covered the central court with a covering, taking into account the heat that is India. However, in 1974, after Khan's death, the dining hall was redesigned by architect Anant Raje, who was very involved with the campus, and situated at its current location, leaving the court open. So this is some sort of a background of the history of the IIM. Now, I don't have enough time, but since I'm talking to students, it's very important for me to share how we work. So we always work on a plan like this, where we have the conservation, and we have different stages of work, from the building documentation with all its subheadings, then the building condition assessment and analysis, then the formulation, proposal, funding, and then the finalization of the proposal and the approval from the client and the implementation. So all this becomes a very important part of a restoration project as against a new project. So here are some wonderful images. I'm sure most of you are in Ahmedabad, have seen. These were the 3 dormitories that were built actually later. And of course, the above shows the main plaza. And this is the library building. So the condition we studied had a lot of issues. I'm not going to go into every single issue in great detail, but you know, there are many types of arches which Khan included in his work. He had, of course, flat arches, semicircular arches, you know, all types of arches, and a particular type of working at that time. The brick had a lot of efflorescence. It was not the highest quality brick. And of course, there must have been a lot of salt in the clay that was used at that time. So many issues came over the years. They're not easy buildings to maintain at all. And these are just some images to show you how they were restoration. Now, these were some important sketches that Khan had done. And when he began to work, he was very worried about how the brickwork would be done and whether people would be able to translate his thoughts and ideas. So he actually insisted on what he called the experimental arch, which is very sacred because he came to India, worked closely with the people here, and this still stands on the campus, the experimental arch. And this led on to many, many thoughts and ideas how the construction would then continue to take place. So I went to UPenn. I did a lot of research there and found some wonderful photographs and wonderful drawings that Khan had done. It was so beautifully preserved, each and every drawing, wearing gloves and in boxes. And I think we have so much to learn from the way that archival material is protected and saved. So you can see women working. This was the early 60s on the campus. And these were some images which showed during the construction, which are quite rare, which we were able to get. So the dormitories were built first from the 60s to the 70s. And then 3 dormitories were built later. And then they began to build all the central buildings. So you can see a photograph here, which actually shows the dormitories at the back. And then you can see the foundations for the faculty building on the left, the school classroom building on the right, and the library, which came afterwards, and the scrubland in the middle. So it was a very different world. And this was the world where Khan came and built and did all his work at that time. Sharid Shah was the structural engineer. We managed to find a few drawings thanks to the IIM, which had kept some of the drawings, and that helped our structural engineers as well. And while we were doing our research, I went into one of the offices and I found this wall planner lying over there and found that it was actually kept by the people in 1974. And if you look carefully, you will see on the 17th that Khan died. So what actually happened was Louis Khan had come to Ahmedabad for work and then went back to New York and actually died on his way back from India in New York. And I thought it was interesting how they just wrote it, on a wall planner that he had gone. And then, of course, that's another story, how everything else finished. So these were some of the events. It was established, and the dormitories were constructed, Doshi Raja Architects established, and then the main building, faculty, and then he died March 74. The dining and kitchen was shifted, then it was constructed, and then the other buildings came up on the IIMA campus. So as far as we were concerned, we won the competition in 2014. And then we began with actually a lot of analysis of the entire campus and preparation of the master plan. So we began the analysis of the dormitories, library block, and the other buildings. And only one dormitory building was taken up, which was D15. We chose it because it was in the worst condition. And then the IIMA actually has to build student housing, which they're doing currently in the new campus, because they cannot give up these dormitories for serious restoration work until they are empty. And that can only happen when the new buildings come up. So there's a lot of toing and froing that will happen. So subsequently, we then took up the library block, and now we are doing the faculty block. So you can see here documentation. The 4 major things, the materials were the brick, concrete, the Kota stone, and of course the wood, the Valsal wood. These were the 4 elements that were very, very crucial. So we actually had to go into the foundation and the substructure. We had to study it. We had to study the load bearing, reinforced brickwork, because the reinforcement of the brickwork caused a lot of the spoiling, which has caused, in fact, a lot of the issues as well. And then the RCC framework and the different types of the brick arched openings, every shape and size possible. So we began with the building condition analysis. There were no drawings at all. We actually had to start from scratch and prepare all the drawings that you're seeing on your screen now. There was nothing available to us We searched very hard, we couldn't find anything, and there was nothing that could be shared either. And we went on, we prepared this, and then we did, of course, the condition mapping, which is the most crucial part of restoration of any building. And you can see there's so many colors here, and there's a legend. And each one of these issues on the legend has to be treated very seriously for us to understand what needs to be done for the building. Then we come up finally, after doing all this, with the conservation plan. So to do the conservation plan, we have to study the condition assessment as well. For instance, the way the bricks were filled. Not only the pointing was not a recessed pointing, which would have been ideal because water runs off, but you can see to the right, the front, how it was the face-filled pointing. And since it was cement pointing, not lime, it was very difficult for us to remove. So we have had to accept the pointing that was originally there. So this is just one example. So there were hundreds of examples like this where we had to study and understand how do we have continuity and change. The picture below is, of course, the experimental arch. And then you can see their fluorescence and the spalling. Their fluorescence, of course, because of the salts that were in the clay that was used for the brick and the mortar. And the spalling over here was tremendous, also caused by the MS reinforcement in the brickwork. Now, apart from that, there were also masonry cracks. You can see to the left, vertical masonry cracks. Now, how do we issue and how do we handle these sort of major issues? The issue always with restoration is also that sometimes people will say, if you have to spend this much and if you have to restore this much, why don't you just break it down and build it new? It will be cheaper perhaps. And this is the challenge that all of us architects have to face, whether we're conservation architects or whether we're just regular architects, it doesn't matter. We have to preserve what's gone before. By breaking things down and just building anew, the value has gone. So a decision has to be taken. Is it worth saving? Is it worth keeping? And why? And then one has to go about it seriously, work on it, and make sure that it becomes relevant for use for today. We cannot make everything reverential. The Rajabai Tower could be reverential. But when you have a building that's part of a campus that's being used by hundreds of students, how do you create that balance? That is the challenge that is always there for people like us. So you can see over here, and if you look carefully, the picture to the right, you can actually see the MS bar popping out. So that was, situation in many areas. And you can see the base of these arches, segmental arches, the condition of that. And then of course the cracks and the embedded reinforcement. If you look carefully, you can see the embedded reinforcement inside. Now this is some of the dormitories, of course, whether it was the quality of the construction, you can see the exposed steel bars in the slabs, their fluorescence. You can see the leakage from the terraces coming down. And then the waterproofing, layers and layers of waterproofing over the years took place. And then naturally, water begins to creep in between the layers also. So to be very honest, these are not easy buildings for the IIMA to maintain. They were very complex, difficult buildings. They had certain weaknesses in the construction itself and the materials that were used at that time. But they were worth preserving. That's what was important. They had to be preserved. They had to be restored. They had to be retrofitted and made relevant today. That was the challenge. There was no question of anything else. How do we address that? So of course, this happens in many buildings. The shafts were designed that were way too small. Today we have shafts, we have the different type of toilets, we have air conditioning in some areas, the electrical systems have changed, we have information technology. So naturally all that had to go. And the other thing that there was a problem was after the earthquake, the Gujarat earthquake, you can see that they actually had to reduce the height of the parapet walls and also in the dormitories, just to make sure that the buildings were stable. So as conservation architects, as restorers, as architects, what do we do? Do we build back some of these things? How do we make it structurally stable? How do we try and bring it up to codes? How do we make it barrier free? So many different issues come up all the time. So for instance, the staircase block of the dormitories were, you can see to the right how high they were, and they were brought down after the earthquake. We again have tried to increase them. We have increased them so that they become have an architectural quality. But of course, we could not take them to be as high as they were originally. So then we come to the NDT testings, the geotech investigations on the cement mortar, on the concrete, on the bricks. We had to map the reinforcement. The picture to the right shows how we had to map the reinforcement within the brick. So a lot of non-semi-destructive testing was done. And this is some images of how it was done. Of course, I can't go into detail. We run out of time. And then we had to do structural stitching because there were cracks in certain areas. So what we did, we had to structurally stitch certain areas, remove some bricks where they were really not good and replace them, and then sort of staple it in a particular way. So it was quite complicated. Wherever we could repair the cracks without having to do anything major, that's what we did. And you can see over here how the structural stitching mock-up was done. It's a very careful process, how the insertion of the stainless steel. Now we've put in stainless steel, the insertion of the stainless steel, and how we have to insert it and how carefully it has to be done in particular areas only. And then the repair, of course, the RCC, this is obvious. I don't have to go into that, how you have to remove the loose concrete and then the rust stabilizers and various other things that needed to be done. And then, of course, cleaning of the surface. Finally, we decided we were not going to use any chemicals or anything, and we've done basic surface cleaning. And we did water repellent. We did the mock-up, and you can see we were quite satisfied that this is good enough for what we intended the restored buildings to look like. Of course, apart from our own structural consultant, Mrs. Gadiali, we also went to the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, where Dr. Arun Menon helped us with the seismic and considerations and analysis for the earthquake. So we found that the structural behavior of the dorms, because of this increased drum height, had caused certain issues. You can see with red, and that had to be addressed. And then, of course, we then prepared a very detailed building condition assessment of all the 4 aspects of the entire competition that we won and the various buildings that form that area. When we did that, we found that the library building needed certain work, and certain dormitories also, D15, would have needed certain work. So we decided then to take D15 up as a trial dormitory so that the IIM would know it covered almost all the different aspects of deterioration that the other dorms had, and so that they could take it up at the appropriate time. So just to show quickly about the dormitories, all the dorms were built of course, 2 triangles in many ways. You can see them all over here. They were quite beautiful and interesting. The dormitory D15, the basement, each dorm was different in some way or the other. And I cannot go into detail, but D15, this was D8, where it had a lovely, Khan had envisaged that these areas would be for students to meet, have some lounges and things like that. And then the rooms would be above. But then over the years, you know how in India, we always fall short of space. And then we begin to use spaces that were for common facilities for something else. So these were some of the issues, that every dorm was different in some way or the other. So we took up, you can see D11, there was a dispensary, D16 had a State Bank of India, so offices, post offices, maintenance offices. So we did an analysis of all the dorms and how we had to address each one of them. And this is how, to the left, how Khan had probably envisaged that this would be the student rooms. and how with a false ceiling, some of these areas had been converted into rooms for the students. So essentially, it is on two sides of the triangle, the rooms are there, and then you have the big triangle in the center with the staircase and the attached block, which has the pantries, toilets, and uh, any other services that were required. And post-restoration for D15, we kept it very, very clear what we wanted to do. We did not disturb the planning at all. We just upgraded all the facilities and stabilized it. So you can see over here the three red rings which were brought down, and the difference in the height of the staircase block, which caused certain earthquake, many issues over there. And then we began the retrofitting proposal of how we could retrofit the building. And we brought back what Khan had envisaged to the ground floor. So if you see on the bottom right, the plan, we have opened up what had become rooms back into the lounges and the common rooms for the students. But when we did that, we also had to strengthen certain things which had deteriorated over the years. So we had to introduce certain beams, but we did it in a particular way that was strong, but yet did not disturb the internal feeling and the double height feeling that Khan had created in these rooms. So this is what we had proposed. These are our drawings. And this was a typical room, a typical student room, where we studied a lot of how perhaps Khan would have liked, he didn't like too much color, but India is a different place. You know, we can't just have grays. So we had to understand how do we create this balance. So we studied a lot of his old projects, how he used color, how he used light in his different Khan buildings all over the world. And then we began executing the work. So you can see we raised that central drum, but we had to bring in certain low buttresses to ensure that there would be no further danger. But at least we raised it so that you could see it from outside. We brought back that original sense of proportion to the building. We also brought back the China mosaic flooring, waterproofing in China mosaic. You can see on the left over years and years of waterproofing that had gone. So we brought that back. So it's a lovely terrace now, the picture to the right. And this is, of course, the building at that time. And over here, we rebuilt the parapet because there were weaknesses there. We did a lot of sample of pointing. We finally went to the one on right. We tried 4 or 5 different types of brick because the brick that Khan used was not the typical bright red terracotta type color of brick. If you know the IIM, it's not the Mangalore type of brick. It's much more sort of a pinkish, lighter sort of color. So we had to go to 4 different quarries and then 4 different establishments till we managed to get the closest that we could get. And then we began repairing the doors, windows, the stitching, the RCC work. You can see over here how we restored the common rooms, got rid of the false ceiling in between and took it back to its original wonderful height that it had. And you can see walls had been built in between. So what we did, we punctured those walls and brought it back to the outside because those were also original entrances into the building at that level. You know, all these buildings enter at different levels. And you can see the picture to the left, how beautiful it becomes once that double height feeling is restored back. And you can see what we've done, we had punctured. But we could not remove the white paint completely because it had gotten into the brick. And when we tried to, we found the brick was not strong enough to have this paint removal. So there's some things which we had to compromise on and accept in a way. And then of course, this is the structural lintel. This is some drawings, how we went about it. And this was a typical room, how we tried to find the closest to the Valsar wood. And it had non-openable windows. We created a pivoted window because there's not air conditioned as yet. And then, of course, we redid the toilets. The picture to the bottom are the new toilets, very simple and functional, completely redone. And this is the completed dormitory to the right. Now to come to the library building, which is the main thing, we had to restore the fabric. We had to upgrade the interiors. and we had to have less stacks. And here the IIM was very supportive because they actually moved a lot of the books out to another area. Students use the library for different reasons now. They don't necessarily come just to read, and they don't come necessarily just to read books. So sometimes they can even sit in their rooms and study. So why do they come? They come to interact, they come to collaborate, they come to discuss. But some come for quietude, for solitude. So we have silent rooms. So we did this combination. And of course, the most famous, beautiful triple story height is the main reading hall, which we restored completely. So we studied the silent zone, quiet zone, and the conversation zone. We worked very closely with the librarian, Dr. Anil Kumar, and I was very, very sad to hear last month that he passed away of COVID. And we miss him greatly because he was a wonderful support to us with, of course, the director, Manoj Bhatt, and all the other people. But Dr. Anil Kumar was there with his team on the site every bit of the way to tell us what his dream was, what his vision was also for this library. And these are pictures of pre-restoration. You can see the main entrance. They had lounges, but lots of stacks and stacks and stacks. You can see stacks on the first floor, and then you can see stacks again. Now this is post-restoration. I'm showing pre and post. So we got rid of a lot of the stacks. This is the first floor plan, which is the main entrance. We created an interpretation center. We moved a lot of the stacks away. We created a cyber laboratory, lounges, and interactive spaces like that. The ground floor plan, which is at the lower level where you can enter only on the south side, used to be a publication department, and again, stacks and offices and administration. What we did was we created a coffee breakout spaces on one side, and we created a children's section and concentrated stacks in certain areas only at this level. So we created a lot of additional space. Then when we come to the second floor, you have the magnificent reading hall, which was there. And again, they had only stacks and carols. We kept the reading hall, the precious reading hall, but on the right side where the lift was, we repaired all the carols, redid them. But then on the upper floors, which was just stacks again, we began to change things a lot. We had carols again, periodical sections. Again, they had stacks, and here we created collaborative areas, study areas where the students would come, chat, open spaces for discussion, keeping all the time the triple level reading hall exactly as it was. So we studied, as I said, this time apart from Khan's lighting, we studied his interiors as well. And what were the colors that we could use, and we felt what he had used. We did a lot of detailed drawings. These are drawings our studio did, how to imagine, how do we create the empty space in the middle, and how do we bring in color and youthfulness, good lighting into the building. All this becomes very important, air conditioning, lighting. Here we had less problem with Dr. Arun Menon's analysis because of the shape of the library, unlike the shape of the dormitory, the building was of course much more stable. So we had only some areas where you have the red and where we had the issues. Then the implementation began. We had to reconstruct the terrace slab, which had completely deteriorated. We had to create new parapets. And of course, I mean, it was a process. You can see removal of waterproofing, casting the new slab, laying the China mosaic. Of course, similar things that I showed you earlier of the new parapets. You can see the retrofitting going on. Now, this was interesting because the southeast corner of the library had completely deteriorated, and we were not going to be able to do the stitching that we had done earlier for the dormitory because it was in a very bad state. So we actually had to remove the brickwork in the southeast corner and reconstruct it very, very carefully, as well as the 80 flat arches that we had. These were also not repairable. They had to be reconstructed. And because of the shape of them, you can see the shape of the brick. You can see the man to the bottom left, how each brick had to be chamfered. It was a huge, huge task to reconstruct these 85 flat arches. So the southeast corner and these 85 flat arches was an enormous aspect of restoration of this library. Um, some new brick pointing was done. And of course, the slab below, you can see the condition. So that slab also was completely recasted. And then we come to the magnificent triple height. There were issues. There was air conditioning earlier, but there was a lot of efflorescence, a lot of issues, which some of which I've told you, mentioned before. You can see some of the services, the condition of the RCC slab. We restored all the doors and windows. We restored all the carrels as well. And here are some before and after pictures. We reused all the old wooden carrels, polished them up. And even in the main triple height study, we also restored all the lights that were there. So you can see some before and after. These are the 85 flat arches that were completely restored by us, rebuilt. And that's the southeast corner. You can hardly make out. It was quite a challenge that we took. And then of course, you know how air conditioning units always come up everywhere before you know it. So that all had to be reworked and worked into the system itself. This is the southeast corner. So you can see the condition made it so that there was no way we could actually repair it. This is the south facade of the library. This is not before and after. We had a lot of beehives, enormous beehives, massive beehives, and the bees used to come into the building, as did pigeons. So we did take a decision that it would not be safe in the long run. So they had to be, we got in specialists who were able to move them away. And this is the west facade, of course, before and after. So I think we've been very reverential, you can see, to everything that's gone before, right down to the doors, windows, the openings, etc. And this is the library terrace, the walkway slab before, after. We found one enormous applique artwork over there and we saved it. We found out it had been done by Sarojiben Lal, who turned out to be very, very famous, a very simple, brilliant, talented woman. And here I have to thank Dr. Chatterjee, who was with the NID earlier, and he has helped us. We have sent it to Delhi now. He has located somebody who is in the process of restoring this applique artwork. And we intend to, of course, naturally put it back in its place. You can see in the upper left image where it was. And you can see these are some interior pictures of before and after, how there were a lot of offices. Now we've just got stacks in some areas. We've brought in, of course, a lot of technology everywhere, made sure that they're interpretive centers, that there's spaces for people to move and just gather together. Lighting, of course, is far superior now. Now, these are the carrels which we repaired to the right as against the old ones to the left. And this is our reading hall. Of course, we've repaired it. We brought in additional lighting because we had a lot of interaction with faculty, with students. It was difficult to read. It was dark over there. So we brought in a lot of lighting as well. You can see posted. Again, here before and after. But the spirit of the place has been kept. The spirit of Khan has been very, very carefully studied and kept in, but bringing in the youthfulness and the way young people want to work and study in today's library. The question of what is a library today has changed in itself. What does a library do for an institute? Is it for research? Is it for reading? Is it for collaborative work? Is it for getting together? What are the uses? So you can see over here the condition of the brickwork before and after as well. We also made the stacks in a particular way that wheelchair can now go between them. It's not that you have to struggle. You can see to the left how there was a column in the middle of stacks. We've very carefully located the stacks so wheelchairs can go in and out. People can walk easily. Some of these basic aspects of decent and good design has been incorporated. And again, some before and after pictures. We brought in color for young people, and I've got a lot of photographs which I haven't shown where people are lounging and enjoying being in the library as well. It was opened, inaugurated by the son of Vikram Sarabhai. And on that day, on the ground floor, there's a virtual reality section, as I told you, an interpretive section. So there was a lot of fun and a lot of uh, entrepreneurship and ideas of moving into the 21st century in many ways, and yet keeping the history and the legacy of such monumental and important buildings without disturbing that. And this was what was also good. We took around a lot of people, which is important to disseminate this knowledge. This was the Getty Conservation Group who came. Then we had at Cornell University, where I'm a professor, I gave some talks on this process. We also had a group of our team, Homiar, Nandini, and many other people from our SNK group who gave lectures at the JJ College and other colleges. And of course, it's been extensively published right from international magazines to various newspapers, etc. Now, this was important because it shows that we won the UNESCO Award for Distinction. And I would like to read that out because I think it's not just for this building that I'm reading it out, but it tells you why. It was an extremely high award that this building won. And what it said was the restoration of the monumental Vikram Sarabhai Library heralds an important step forward in the preservation of 20th century architecture in India. The linchpin of Louis Kahn's iconic Indian Institute of Management campus in Ahmedabad, the library was rehabilitated from a state of extensive material dilapidation. Through careful studies and extensive modeling, the conservation team has conquered a range of difficult technical challenges to extend the life of the composite brick and concrete structure with its distinctive geometric forms. The project has recovered configurations and uses of space in line with the architect's original vision, while upgrading functionality to ensure that the library is ready to meet contemporary requirements and provide universal access. With modernist heritage enjoying increasing acclaim, but still facing the widespread threat of demolition, this initiative promises to have major policy impact within Ahmedabad and throughout India. And I really hope that this will be the case. So to end, we have now begun on the faculty blocks. Work has actually begun on site, and that I will keep for another lecture, perhaps some other time. So what is the aim of conservation? We have to retain the cultural significance of a place. We have to document the condition before we do any type of intervention. And we should try and have minimal intervention. We have to have research for carrying out mock-ups, very crucial before we implement them. And as far as possible, use like-to-like materials. And then we have prepared for the IIM a maintenance manual. Because as architects, we come and we go. We cannot maintain. But unless these buildings are maintained and when issues have to be undertaken, they are taken in a responsible way. So in the maintenance manual, we have also provided detailed guidelines where when interventions happen, how they have to happen. Because otherwise interventions can cause more difficulties and more problems to an old building than even existed before the interventions took place. So it is complicated. For me, I say, why conserve? I believe that cultural heritage offers city. I come from the city of Mumbai, and I know how complex it is, but it also is an amazing city which has got a huge architectural and cultural heritage. So the heritage which we see is the legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we also pass on to the next generation. That ensures a sense of belonging, a sense of place. I believe it brings in a certain equality and it's source of life, of our spirit and our inspiration for all of us. Thank you very much.
Uh, Thank you, Brinda. That was most illuminating. And, it was so interesting to see how the whole thing was sort of achieved, the first part of it that you've done so far. And this is a building that particularly in Ahmedabad, all of us are very familiar with. And as students at Ahmedabad, made several visits there. I mean, it was quite new at the time that I was there, but yeah, I mean, it's very sort of important particularly for students from SET, in your sort of education. So thank you. I think that was very well presented. So now what I'd like to do is to open it up for questions from the people that are here. If you want to uh, ask Brinda a question, get into a discussion, please do that now. Yeah, there's quite a few of us here. I may start with one question, Brinda. Do you think that at the time when they were building this, were they aware of the sort of problems that they might have in the future with earthquake?
Well, early 60s, I doubt very much that it's the codes like they exist today certainly did not exist. And so much of direction has to be followed today. I don't think that advantage was there. Of course, the main, as I said, the library building and the other two, because of their shape and form, the stability is there. The issue is more in the dormitories because of the shape and form. And I was with a friend and one of our structural consultants who gave us a wonderful, gave my studio a wonderful lecture the other day on the new seismic codes, because we asked him to do that for us. If we have to follow the seismic codes, then architects have to stay with rectangles and squares, and we can't have any other shape or size. Right. So I frankly think Louis Kahn certainly had all the freedom in the world to design as he so chose, whether it was in Bangladesh or, with all the big openings that he has, and not worrying about the climate, and we have to worry about the birds and the pigeons and the monkeys on the campus. So I think those days an architect built certainly an iconic group of buildings, but whether the same group of buildings would pass a client today is another question altogether. And there was certainly a great freedom that he had. Maybe some star architects may have it or may not, but certainly today many other issues and other disciplines play a very important part in design for an architect.
Sure. In fact, they had I think somebody's asking a question. They had a huge earthquake, not only the Bhuj, but before that in Ahmedabad as well. I think that was in 2006. No.
That was the earthquake.
Yeah.
That was the earthquake that after which they reduced the height of the staircase blocks, etc.
Yeah.
It was not the wood. So it is a seismic zone. And, now our numbers, like even Mumbai now has gone up to 3. So everything is getting more worrying. Now, this is another issue that always comes up, how do you ensure that when you restore, you're able to completely bring up the codes of today, because today earthquake codes are changing all the time. We have the 2016, 18, and you cannot do everything that is required, either in the planning, in the number of staircases, the width of corridors, many issues. So it's becoming very, very difficult and more challenging to restore old buildings for use, especially when they're buildings like school buildings or university buildings or high-risk buildings where if there's an earthquake, they're actually used to mitigate disaster where people will be brought into it.
Life
So
safety issues. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
so the structural engineers, that is why we had our own structural engineer, and we went to IIT. We had Mr. Gadiali and Dr. Menon, where they specialize in this, so that
Hmm.
we got the best people possible uh, to do the best possible.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because it's a load-bearing masonry structure, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I think there's a question. Varisha, would you like to ask? Yeah, okay, she's on. Hmm.
Yes, so I've written the question. I wanted to know if so how many years do you think will this building now stand without interventions after this particular restoration with all the maintenance guidelines given by you?
Well, I don't think anyone has an answer, but we hope for several, naturally for several decades more. But every so often, I think one will have to do a structural assessment, every so many X number of years to recheck and make sure that everything is as stable as possible. So it's like a human being, you have to have tests as you get older and older, you have to have medical tests also. So you have to make sure, and then you have to attend to anything that you see which may be problematic and not let it get worse, and attend to it in a very careful way. But old buildings in Mumbai, of course, we have hundreds of, stone buildings which have lasted for 100, 200 years. And after we've restored, they can go on endlessly because they were built in a very, very clear way with stone masonry, very strong, with limited deterioration. So their lifetime is extremely possible for hundreds of years. The IIM, of course, is a series of brick buildings. So now we've introduced the stainless steel, we've strengthened them. They have to be monitored. So I'm sure they will have a considerable life ahead of them.
And I had one more question. That Ahmedabad has a lot of modern monuments like the Sanskar Kendra, Milonas, etc. So some of these buildings are used time to time, whereas others aren't. Like the Sanskar Kendra is more or less abandoned right now.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
how does one decide if that building is worth restoring or should it be like demolished and then changed?
I think the very fact, Varsha, is that your name? Varisha. The very fact that you have chosen two or three buildings and named them means they must connect with you in some way. You're
Hmm.
asking about them because you're wondering about them. You must feel like you like them. You want them. They played an important role in the history, and they should be saved. So that's why finally it comes down to the people of the city. The people must want these buildings to be saved. They may not all be architects. You see, everybody has a different reason for wanting to save buildings. You will have the architectural historians, you will have the architects who have great value for the modernist architecture, for 20th century architecture, who needed to be saved. But the buildings also have to be beloved by the people of the city and by the people who use it. And they must want to save it. That's what's important. We recently restored a small building in Mumbai because the people of that complex wanted to save that 100-year-old building, and they came to us. So it has to be a combination of intellect, of passion, of your heart. And finally, the government and the state government have to have that value also. Because finally, it's not easy to save these bigger buildings that you're talking about. I know the museum, I mean, it really is in a bad state. I went and saw it.
Hmm.
I was quite horrified. And I was surprised that the city of Ahmedabad let such an important 20th century building deteriorate like that. So, but their priorities, and how do you make this a priority? So this is where all you young people, you young students, don't think that that only if you go and get all your degrees that you're a conservation architect. Each and every one of you living in a country like India, which has over 10,000 listed ASI monuments, each one of you has to be a conservation architect. Your studio where you work have to build new and they have to preserve the old. If we leave conservation to just a handful of trained conservation architects, all our buildings are disappearing one by one. It has to be part of our practice. We should treat it as important as building something new. And we must conserve it. Then we can always go to a specialist, get some advice, etc. But the movement has to come from the entire architectural fraternity. It cannot be left as some sort of a small, thin layer of conservation architects who are going to save the whole of India with a 3,000 year old history and hundreds of thousands of old buildings and monuments all over this great country of ours. We are going to then lose too much, too fast.
So, there's a program, there's a master's in conservation in the postgraduate program at CEPT. And in fact, right now they've taken up that first Faculty of Architecture building by Doshi, and as they've started working on it, it almost looks like such a large part of it has to be sort of, I can't remember exactly when it was built, but it's between, I think 62 is when the school started. It must have been built around 66, I think, 66 or 65. So it's old. We celebrated the 50th year and so on. And so they've started the conservation of that main building, and we've all seen pictures of it. Large parts of the slabs have to, they had to remove because it was structurally unsafe. After all, a building, sort of deteriorates over a long period of time. But things like, so that is something that they can, like the IIM project, even though it is so large, it is funded by the institution, whereas the Sanskar Kendra, I mean, it's like the government has to step in with the funding and so on, right? I suppose people must have made proposals. I'm not sure. But yeah, we saw it where, a few years ago when we had our sort of 12 on 12 get together at the Tagore Hall, and then you could see this was really in bad disrepair. Yeah, there's more questions.
Sure, yes,
Just read out the questions, please. Yeah.
definitely. Sarvesh is asking, with respect to the reinforced bricks, how was the issue addressed knowing the extent of its presence throughout the building and its vulnerability in the future?
Yes. So I have shown you that we did that sonar testing. We did many types of testing so that we could I actually showed you that image of the reinforcement within the brickwork. You may recall that. So that is what enabled us to understand how the reinforcement was running. So wherever there was spalling, wherever there was actual separation, those bricks were physically removed very, very carefully, and the stainless steel reinforcements were put in, and then the new bricks were put in there. So it was a very difficult and labor-intensive work. So we addressed whatever the non-destructive and the semi-destructive testing sonar results showed us, apart from many, many other results. I may not be able to go into each one in detail. And going by our structural engineers, both of them, their advice, we went forward. So there's less likelihood, naturally, of SS rusting as against MS. And the new bricks that we put in, we hope will be of a better quality than what was they'd used in the 60s and 70s. As you all know, that was a time of great cement shortage, and even the mortar that was used and the clay that was used had a lot of different minerals in it, which caused huge amount of efflorescence. So with brick, this is a very serious issue which needs to be addressed when people are using brick in big buildings like this.
Sarvesh, can you go
Yeah,
ahead and ask a second question, please?
yeah. Ma'am, I had another question with respect to the concrete slabs. So I believe the slabs must have been really very thin owing to the construction that was happening during that time. I mean, Khan and also even in the modernist construction that was happening in Delhi, we know of the slabs being really very thin. So were there any issues that you faced while recasting those particular slabs, the terrace slabs which you were talking about, with the thickness and the detailing that changes because of the changed thickness?
You're absolutely right. The terrace slab, at least we didn't have an issue because it's a terrace slab. But the slab that connected the faculty building to the library building to that corridor, that slab was extremely thin. It was really under designed, I think. And we had to work out details very carefully. You're absolutely right there. It was a very thin slab. And on top of that, there was no cover, all the steel, all the reinforcement was exposed. And the thickness was much less than a standard thickness for that slab. So you're very right there. And that was an issue which we addressed.
Uh, so I wanted to ask if you went for a thicker slab while replacing it,
Yes, we did go for a
or
slightly thicker slab. I'm not sure exactly how much, whether it was 4 to 6 mm, but I do have it somewhere down. But we did go for a thicker slab there. Yes, for the one that was connecting, the long connection. For that
yeah,
one, we went for a thicker slab. Yes.
yeah. And ma'am,
But
if
for the terrace slab, I don't think we did because,
hmm,
we did not replace the entire terrace slab. The part
okay,
that was over the triple height reading room, that was in an okay condition. What was on the southeast side, on the east side, that was in a very bad condition. So we redid that aspect of the terrace slab only. And then we did the waterproofing to bring everything level. So it may have been slightly more, made level with the waterproofing, sloped down to take care of the drainage, and then we put the China mosaic on it. So all these are, with restoration, Sarvesh, it's very important that we are on a lot of site decisions are taken also, because the drawings cannot be so detailed to cover every aspect of the whole building as hard as we try. So to be on site, to have come to visit regularly, some of these issues were really very important for the team, and to have good project managers who understand restoration work, because the architect cannot be sitting there all the time. We cannot be. So these are some of, you're very right. These are some of the complexities and issues, and hundreds like this come up, that have to be determined and decided during the course of the restoration process.
thank you, ma'am. The presentation was really very insightful. I'm sure it's a learning for all of us, really.
Thank you.
Somebody had a question about whether the restoration of concrete, the modernist, exposed concrete buildings is equally arduous. Now, I'm not able to get back to that first bit.
Frankly, I think nothing could be more arduous than the restoration of brick.
Of an RC? Yeah.
Of brick, yeah. Brick,
Yeah.
brick is very, very complicated. We have restored
Yeah.
so many buildings, and we have restored buildings in Mumbai, beautiful basalt stone buildings. We have restored concrete buildings. But this brick buildings are one of the biggest challenges to restore.
Yeah.
And then make it look like as beautiful as it was at the end, that Khan looking down from somewhere will not say, well, what have they done?
Yeah.
Hi.
Now, there's a question from Shunya.
Yeah, hi.
Do you want to ask that? Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. I just want to know if Khan would have used concrete as a material.
Oh, yes.
Would it have
He's
been
used.
difficult to restore? Because I just feel that since it was brick, it allowed you that inclusivity,
No. Khan has used a lot of concrete as well.
Okay.
I read this out to you. I will read it again. These are his words. The material of brick-bearing walls, he called them brick-bearing walls and piers, with concrete floors, is retained throughout the larger spans, giving rise to arches and buttresses. The more modest spaces, simple slabs on walls. So his buildings are very much composite. It is a combination of brick and concrete.
Okay, okay, okay. Because I was just wondering if it was completely a concrete building like Mill Owners or Chandigarh, would it have been easier for you to restore or difficult? Or was it because of
Oh,
material?
I think easier for sure.
Oh,
I mean, this is my personal opinion. I mean,
That the
everyone has
concrete buildings are easier to restore compared to the brick ones. Yeah,
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 because look at the complications which I showed you. You know, a brick is
yeah.
like made up of little bits and pieces and parts, and
Right.
we can't just pour concrete and make it. You know, okay. I
Yeah.
had to like those 85 flat arches which I showed you on the east face. Each one of
Yes.
those arches had to be done separately, and each brick had to be cut in a particular way to get the arch, the flat
Sure.
arch shape. With concrete,
Yes.
we'd have just had a formwork and poured the concrete.
Right. Right.
okay.
And
Thank you.
also the way the brick gets eaten up, right? Even with acidity and all this kind of
Each
stuff.
brick
Yeah.
has its own way of behaving.
Yeah. Prasit, Prasit,
Yes, ma'am.
there was some question that you had. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. I have always wondered whenever I visited IIM that why have been RCC lentils used when there were segmental arches always present, which would actually work as lentils. So, like, that's a question I haven't been able to still figure out. Like, there's an lentil over which you have an arch gap, but the arch itself can work as a lentil.
You'll have to ask Khan that question. That was very much his design, you know, where he combined this. And also the importance of the RCC, that was his design, the combination of the brickwork held together with the RCC lintel. That was his design. He had this combination of RCC and brick. And that's what gives a lot of beauty also, if you look at the buildings. So that was part of the original, his thinking, you know. And if you read about him, he explains in some of his writings why he did this combination. So I will not speak for him, but definitely it was intentional.
Sure.
So perhaps it's not just a structural solution. Yeah, it's also the breaking up of the opening and other formal sort of issues.
Maybe he thought that, you know, you would have some contrast, so many reasons, you know,
Proportioning, yeah.
his own beauty to it. And yet it worked structurally. That was important.
Yeah.
So he worked very much in concrete as well, you know, and of course, Bangladesh shows. And he actually was working in Bangladesh, I think even before he did IIM, and then it became parallel. So he was working with very different materials in different parts of the world. But within South Asia itself, he did two very different complexes.
Dhaka and Ahmedabad. Yeah. So any other questions? Nobody has posted them, but if anybody wants to discuss anything. So we'll kind of let you go then.
Thank you.
You've been here for a long period of time. Thank you so much.
You're
Very
so welcome.
illuminating. And for us, it's very close to our heart, particularly in Ahmedabad, the Indian Institute of Management. And a lot of our faculty, when I was studying there, had worked with Louis Kahn, and they came back from the US and they started to teach at SET. Mr. Jain, Kulbhushan Jain, Janani Mehta, Meena Jain, of course, Anant Raje, they all kind of worked with Khan. So, you know, it was a big sort of an influence at the time when we were studying at Ahmedabad. So this was wonderful to actually sort of go into the innards of IIM. Yeah.
So a pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And
Sure.
it was very nice of you to accept this invitation.
All the best to the students. And remember what I told you all, you come from a country which has lots and lots of things to work on. So while you can do all the new things as well, the creativity of new buildings, I understand, I do them as well. We don't just have to look at the Google and look at images there. Look back at what we already have and see how you can contribute, each one of you can contribute to the country and to saving the incredibly rich architectural heritage that all of us are so privileged to have inherited. And now it is in your young hands to make sure that we do not lose it. Remember that. That's your responsibility. And you will enjoy this responsibility. So take care, be safe through this pandemic, and look after yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Brinda. Thank you.